What's cracking? It's that time again for another Rice Rewind. And today I am re-releasing my third interview with Max Keiser. He's an American broadcaster and filmmaker, the former host of the Keiser Report and the current host of the Orange Pill podcast, both of which feature his wife, Stacey Herbert. He is also the current senior Bitcoin advisor to the president of El Salvador. This interview was recorded and released on January 19th, 2021. I do have the honor and privilege today to be joined by the one and only Mr. Max Funky Keiser. So I want to pull my friend in the stream. Max, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Rice. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. And thank you for doing this, scheduling it so quickly, especially in such an important time period during American history with everything going on with the election process that we experienced and now the coming inauguration that's scheduled for tomorrow. So how's everything going with you and Stacey with everything? It's been like 9 months since we talked on an interview. How's everything been since then? It's been a crazy year.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting in that when we huddled down here almost a year ago, we just realized that everything can be done right here at our house. Really, we do all of our shows here. We just order in all the stuff we need, and a lot of the stuff that's been happening outside, like in DC or elsewhere, it just seems like it's happening somewhere else. Really, we don't really have any participation in it. With having Bitcoin, it's we're moving away from all that. We opted out of the whole political quagmire long ago. And this just kind of, it just kind of accelerates that whole thinking of just opting out of it. I don't think there's going to be everything is going to be sliding downhill from here. If you're tied to fiat money, right? So, so there's not a huge, it's just been, I've been enjoying it. 2020 was probably one of the best years of my life.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, especially if you use this time well, and I would definitely agree. I mean, aside from, and it sounds kind of selfish considering everything that's going on around the world, but if you utilize your time well, you can make the best out of any situation. So I'm glad you said it that way. It's always a silver lining to everything.
This idea of what is selfish, what is not selfish. And I think that it's people who start stacking sats and accumulating Bitcoin, they become individually sovereign or individually wealthy, individually sufficient. And that's not selfish. I mean, selfish is like what politicians are trying to do by printing lots of money to help them and to make them rich by all that money printing. That's selfish. But being individually completely self-contained is the opposite of being selfish.
I get it. No, and I agree. I'm just saying, when you think about having a better year amongst all the tragedy that I experienced. But I get your point of view 100%. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you before we can kind of get into Bitcoin, which is obviously what everybody wants to hear from you right now, because you are the man of predictions. So, but I want to ask, like, as far as the political climate, everything that we've experienced politically and economically with all this money printing, because from what I'm understanding, we've printed up basically a fifth of the money supply in 2020, if that's correct. So, and I know we haven't even begun to feel the pain. Like you said, everything's going to go downhill from now. I'd kind of like to get your retrospect of what's kind of gone down like most of last year. And then I'd like to get your perspective on the current climate, like right now politically, especially in the US and everything surrounding the inauguration. So now it's like a long 2-part question, but
right. Well, Stacey and I have been covering banks and global finance and markets for 16, 17 years now. And I think, you got to go back to 2008. That's a really key moment. So during the 2008 global financial crisis, the Obama administration had a choice. They could have bailed out all of the debtors, and that would have been all of the mortgage holders and credit card holders, or they could have bailed out the creditors, and those are the banks that made fraudulent loans. All the banks the loans that were made by the banks at that time were under any legal definition fraudulent. So Obama chose to bail out the creditors. And that was really the first time in history that a leader decided not to bail out the debtors with a debt jubilee. That's usually, it goes back to biblical times. That's what leaders usually do in these situations. Right. He chose to bail out the creditors, the people who caused all the problems. And what that means is that, as we said in 2008, that this would simply make the problem a lot worse. And within 10 to 12 years, we'd have a repeat, but much, much worse, because essentially you took all of the banks that were committing all these massive frauds, and instead of penalizing them in some way, you expanded their credit, their credit card, if you will, their credit facilities to 10, 20 times what they were. And what they did is they went out and they did the exact same crimes all over again, but they did it on a much larger scale. So here we are in 2021, and predictably, we're heading for another major credit freeze. So the credit will freeze again, like it did in 2008. And that will be met with another wall of paper money. And the results will be even more catastrophic than they have been since 2008.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with what you're saying. And it seems like since 2008, everything has been sort of put on life support, zombie banks. And we've seen in 2019, we've seen the inverted yield curve, and then the repo markets. And then conveniently, end of 2019, early 2020, we have this pandemic. And then, it's blamed. All the economic problems that we've been having are now blamed on this, and it's not anything from 2008 and trying to put a Band-Aid on the situation. Basically putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, it's not really going to solve the problem.
Now, when you talk about inverted yield, or you talk about negative interest rates, so what we're saying here is that we have a complete absence of what's called price discovery. So in a market-driven economy, in a free market-driven economy, in a free market capitalist economy, there's something called price discovery. As Adam Smith eloquently described it, the invisible hand. It's out there in the marketplace, and everyone's acting in their own self-interest. And the result is the best price is, price discovery takes place. And you have an extremely efficient marketplace. And this was the transition really from feudalism of the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment. I mean, Adam Smith was an enlightened thinker. And the whole idea of human rights and the rights of man and all the things that we talk about in terms of being the Enlightenment, that's the Enlightenment applied to money, the price discovery, and the invisible hand. But when you talk about inverted yield curve or negative interest rates, that is the opposite of price discovery. That is, once again, the state or the dictator or the king or the monarch or the Politburo or the Central Committee imposing their iron fist into the market and fixing prices, price fixing, not free right. market, but price fixing. And it always fails miserably. And when you hear Janet Yellen or Jerome Powell talk about their policies, they're talking about price fixing. They never mention anything to have anything to do with free markets or price discovery. Erroneously, many groups in our society blame "quote unquote" capitalism for the failure of what's going on, but it's not capitalism that's the failure. It's the failure of policymakers to allow capitalism or free markets or the principles of the Enlightenment to express themselves in the marketplace. And so predictably, we have a catastrophe.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so eloquently said. And I mean, it definitely leads us up to where we are today. What are your thoughts on everything that's been going on just this year, 2021, when it comes to U.S. politics and how it's going to affect things moving forward, especially under a Biden administration?
Well, we said when Trump took office that, and he was very explicit, he said he believed in deglobalization. And so I think that kicked off an era of deglobalization and de-dollarization. And those trends now are getting more extended. And so deglobalization is happening at a rapid pace. So countries are hunkering down, trade wars, tariffs, border conflicts, this type of thing that goes on. It's happening with a lot more severity because we were deglobalizing. De-dollarization is also accelerating as more countries trade with themselves in their own currency outside of the US dollar. So the US dollar is world reserve currency that's been in place since the end of World War II. That's being de-dollarized or falling apart. And that has consequences, large consequences. The new administration coming in doesn't seem like they have any kind of recognition of that as the issue. They haven't said anything other than to do exactly the same problems, do exactly the same policies that have created the problems, but to do them in much bigger, right? I think Paul Krugman at the New York Times this week was suggesting that the U.S. should essentially have a soft default on its debt, right? So the last time the U.S. had a major debt default was 1971. The
Right.
U.S. defaulted on its obligations to Great Britain, who they owed a lot of gold to, but they defaulted on that obligation and they gave them paper instead. That's closing of the gold window under Nixon that we know about.
The Nixon shock.
Right. So now that I would say this is, since then, there's probably the second major default. That if they take Paul Krugman's advice and the U.S. essentially prints 50, 60, 70 trillion in dollars to try to soft default. He used the word default, right? So it's you can call it a soft default or a hard default. It's still a default.
Right.
And that's going to have reverberations around the world. And it's predictable based on what we saw in 2008. 2008 was probably the last chance that America had to kind of save itself from going into the gutter. But that opportunity was lost. And this new administration is probably just going to quadruple down on all those failed policies again. And so therefore the results will be catastrophic.
Well, under a Biden administration, do you think that we're going to see, is it going to be good for the cryptocurrency space, Bitcoin, blockchain in general?
Well, the Bitcoin as safe haven will get a lot of attention, a lot of traction. So the capital flight, there's a capital flight going on right now out of fiat into Bitcoin. And to some extent, you would think it would go into gold and silver, but we haven't really seen that yet. You mentioned silver at the top of the show. I will mention that, but we don't see that happen. We see it in Bitcoin. Bitcoin, why? Because Bitcoin has actual price discovery, whereas gold and silver right now suffer from having price discovery because those markets have been entirely financialized. For every ounce of gold, there's probably 10,000 ounces of paper gold.
Yes, derivatives. Yeah, that's exactly how the prices are established, is because of the paper contracts, not the actual. Because if you go to like a local place that's selling, or a precious metals dealer that's selling gold and silver, they're going to be selling above the market price right now. They're not accepting what the market is saying these metals are worth.
Yeah, exactly. And so that.
So I think it's easier to hold that down. They've had that market for so long, the JP Morgans, the silver market, the manipulation, they've had it so long. And obviously the market cap of Bitcoin is a lot smaller and it's easier to manipulate in that aspect. But now, like from my perspective, since the 25th, because the 25th we hit 25K. And one of your predictions back in 2019 for 2020 was to hit 28K, and we ended up ending the year on 29K. But that was like the traditional markets were closed. So that was all, in my opinion, retail, because the traditional markets for the most part are going OTC. It's not affecting the markets that much. So would you agree that what we've been experiencing for the most part since like Christmas, the 25th of December of 2020, being that it's mostly a retail push now?
Well, Grayscale and Digital Currency Group over there with Barry Silbert, they just had the biggest single day buy in history, $500 million.
18, what is it? 1,800 times the amount of daily supplied Bitcoin.
Right. So that's institutional buying, and that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? So the daily mining output's about 900 coins, and the demand is 4,000 or 5,000 coins. So, and that's a lot of that's institutions. The institutions are, I would say in 2020, it was retail. 2020, we saw a classic retail.com like blow off when the price got to 20,000 and then it crashed back down to under 4,000. That was a classic retail blow off top. And since then, it's been institutional. We haven't seen really retail come in with a frenzy yet. I think maybe in 2021 they will come back, and we'll see it in 1917. I think I said 1920. I meant 1917. God damn it, I'm so confused, Rice. In 2017, okay. In 2017, we had that retail blow off top. And right now in 2021, I don't think we've got the retail, but I think we'll see them come in, and that will just be another leg up.
Yeah, no, I could see that. But now at the same time, with what you just said with grayscale, we haven't seen an increase in the price of Bitcoin. We haven't seen it affect the market because it was all done over the counter. So it does look like there may be a combination, but obviously the majority of buying is the financial institutions. Because I know that just between Cash App and PayPal, they're purchasing 100% minimum of what's being mined daily.
I think that, the inventory on the exchanges is dropping, right? And I say, I've been saying this for a while. I think a big factor that you got to consider is that the exchanges up until a couple of years ago were all pretty dodgy, and exchanges like BitMEX and others, they were engaged in a lot of wash trading and a lot of foolishness, and a lot of the volume was fake. I know when Michael Saylor said when he went in to buy his first big stake in Bitcoin, he determined that the average daily volume in Bitcoin, that was true volume, was about 50 million a day. So, which is a lot less than what we would see being reported as the daily volume in all these exchanges, because a lot of it was nonsense volume, and which is not unheard of in financial markets. The NASDAQ market is half the NASDAQ market is fake volume, because it's just broker dealers dealing with themselves out of their own inventory for all kinds of reasons, but mainly to kind of game the market and make a little money on the side. But that's considered part of the system, and there's no real strict enforcement of those anti-front running laws for those market makers or on the New York Stock Exchange either. So, okay, the Bitcoin market, you see the same kind of thing. But so over the last couple of years, we're transitioning from from fake volume to real volume. And that's kind of like churning through an overhead or a supply of volume to create the price discovery. So pretty soon, what I think is going to happen is that a Michael Saylor type or a corporate type or an institution will come in with an order to buy 10 to 20 billion dollars of Bitcoin, and suddenly within a few trades they're going to be discovering there's no supply at all, and then suddenly the price will gap from 37,000 to 47,000, right? Or 52,000. It could happen in 10 minutes, because there's the market's kind of lulled people into a sense that there is supply out there. But I think that it's churning through all that bullshit supply, and then once that's all gone, the institutions are going to in for a rude awakening, because they won't be able to source any coins at any price until it gets a lot higher. So I think the next break is going to be a gap. It's going to just suddenly gap higher, and then that'll be a big story and what's going on, blah blah blah. But I think that's what we're seeing.
How do you think that's going to affect exchanges, like centralized exchanges themselves that are in the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin trading space, being that you're saying kind of like the liquidity is starting to dry up per se? How do you think this is going to affect decentralized exchanges? And do you see them going down just as well as you see financial institutions going down as well?
Well, like any exchange, they have to have a big fat credit line. So to make markets, it's all out of your credit line. So some exchanges will be able to arrange huge credit lines to manage their inventory. Some won't.
Right.
You walk the plank. Back again in 2008, we had two sacrificial lambs, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. It was deemed that there were two chairs were missing when the music stopped, and those two were taken out. Bear Stearns was essentially given to JP Morgan for $1, and they got all their assets for virtually nothing. Bear Stearns. And then Lehman Brothers is an interesting case. And Dick Fuld, of course, was a tragic hero of that era. He likes to think of himself as being, but they were sacrificed to keep the wheels moving. So similarly, we could see something similar where one or two exchanges has to be sacrificed or closed down, whatever. But we'll see. I mean, that wouldn't be unsurprising.
No, it definitely would not be surprising. And something else that you've been speaking a lot about is what's going on with the financial institutions that obviously have been getting bailouts upon bailouts. Banks are extremely highly leveraged. How do you think all this is? I mean, I know you're talking about one of these institutions going down and it just kind of creating a domino effect. When are you anticipating this kind of failure in these centralized traditional organizations, these corporations, and how do you think it's going to ultimately affect US dollar and bottom line?
Right. Well, so with markets, you have what are called market signals and prices, and they signal to the market what's happening to the market. And for 20, 30 years now, we've had really widespread collusion between all the world's central banks. And this is written in a great book by Nomi Prinz, by the way, the title of which is Collusion. She talks about central banks colluding with each other. So because there's no competition in global finance and there's just this collusion going on with central banks who are engaged in the massive fraud of claiming that there's no inflation and that they need to print money for their friends, we have amassed a tremendous number of problems. So now, as the policy appears to be to quadruple down on this fraud of colluding to pretend that there's no inflation and we need to print lots of money for our friends again, you are running into two problems. Number one is social unrest. So people are beginning to figure this out and they are becoming quite angry. And the second thing is Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is offering a true price discovery. So all the fiat money around the world is in a hyperinflationary collapse against Bitcoin. That's what Bitcoin's telling us, that Bitcoin, you've got real price discovery. And it's telling us that all this fiat money is in a hyperinflationary collapse right now. And so, again, people are beginning to figure this out. And as a safe haven play, as a store of value play, capital is moving into Bitcoin. And as the central banks continue to erode and the problem continues to get worse, and there's no new solutions or thinking, just to continue doing the same broken thing, right? You're going to see Bitcoin gallop higher, which is going to attract more capital. And you're just going to have this bifurcated global economy. There's going to be a Bitcoin economy and a Bitcoin world and a Bitcoin life and people living the Bitcoin life. And there'll be everybody else.
That Bitcoin life. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, we call it the orange pill life, right? So we started this new podcast, Orange Pill Podcast, which is really living the orange pill life. So we were red pilled already 10 years ago because we started buying Bitcoin in 2011. And we were essentially red pilled and we figured it all out a long time ago. So we don't need to be red pilled. Now we're orange pilled. We live in the orange pill lifestyle of the Bitcoin lifestyle. Like we've seen all the Andreas Antonopoulos, we've been to all the conferences. We know the whole story.
Man, you're motherfucking Max Keiser.
Right. That's we've graduated, right? We're into the
they better recognize
now. But there's a promised land. Once you get orange pilled, the whole world and the whole universe opens up to you. Like, oh my God, my fear is leaving me. I don't have to be afraid of these idiots anymore. I don't have to I mute on Twitter. Like, it's just like, I mute everybody except Bitcoiners. So I mute whoever the president is. I mute Jack Dorsey. I mute whoever, they've got nothing to say to me really. I mean, I use it as a broadcasting and an advertising platform, but I don't get anything from it unless it's Bitcoiners.
Right.
So that's just true across the board. It's just getting more like that every day.
I mean, I can attest to that because I mean, you've given me, a small person in a space, a lot of attention, and I appreciate that. I mean, you definitely are one to interact with the community and be a part of the community and support individuals and different ideologies, which I really appreciate. And we definitely need to have these outspoken people. And I do love Andreas Antonopoulos, but yeah, he's not that confrontational type. Like, I like it when you when I'm seeing you like at conferences, when you have conversations with Peter Schiff, when you just go off in full funky Max mode. It's beautiful. I love the passion. And
yeah, well, that's like a legacy of my Wall Street career, right? So anyone who's worked on Wall Street knows that this is the way people work on Wall Street. This is an average office exchange in Wall Street. If you're a banker, you're working at a firm, you're on Wall Street, and the way people talk to each other in that setting is like that: extremely belligerent, shouting, screaming, insults, that type of thing. So when I'm talking to people in that, like Peter Schiff is a Wall Street guy. We started on Shearson Lehman Hutton. We were working there at about the same time.
okay.
And so I talked to him as I would if we were working together in the office. Like, look, and I go off on a tangent, but this is what he's used to. This is his milieu, if you will. So, why not? I mean, they're talking to financiers, talking to bankers, and on a professional level, this is how conversations are had. And so I'm giving people in the Bitcoin space kind of, I think, a view into what their competition sounds like and what they are saying, right? Because a lot of people in the Bitcoin space, they think that they have to make friends with the people in the regulatory, the regulators, or they have to make
Right.
friends. Like this whole idea of making friends with regulators is funny. I mean, people are saying, "Oh, Gary Gensler's coming over in the SEC, and he's a friendly regulator, and he talked about Bitcoin when he was, a professor." Blah blah blah. But anyone who's worked in the industry knows that the attitude, and you hear this from Jamie Dimon or whoever ever it is, there's always a mantra on Wall Street, which is that just don't pay attention to any law. Never pay attention to any law because we've got lawyers. We take part of your commissions, and for a reason. We have a
Right.
battery of lawyers here. Do not pay attention to any law because we can do one of two things, or three things actually. One, we can change the law. Two, we can make new laws. And I'd say a great example of that is when Citibank took over Travelers.
Okay.
And Jamie Dimon, I think, was at Citi at the time. But that was a clear violation of the Glass-Steagall Act. And so they broke the law flagrantly. And but they passed a law later that retroactively made that deal legal.
Well,
So there's no law that applies to any banker at all. Eric Holder under Barack Obama said he's introduced the Eric Holder doctrine, which said that bankers are unprosecutable. They enjoy special status, special privilege. You can't prosecute a banker because they're systemically important to the economy. So this gave a total green light to just continue doing more and more fraud. And then the third thing is that most people that do business with a bank, you're signing away when you do business. And even people who put their money into a regular bank, any bank, statutorily, the bank owns your money. You don't own your money. Once it arrives in the bank, it's the legal property of the bank, not you. Anyone who does business with a broker, it binds you to a mandatory arbitration by a arbitration panel that's set up by Wall Street. And so very, very few people ever win those cases. Maybe 1 in 1,000 is completely rigged against you. So this is the world in which, so Bitcoin's not going to ever triumph in that world because the regulators from day one are living in a cesspool of no legal framework whatsoever.
right.
So don't even talk to a regulator. Ignore the regulators. They've got nothing to do with Bitcoin. They're never going to do anything positive. Bitcoin is self-regulating. It's self-clearing. It's self-verifying. It's self-custodian. Custodian. It does it all by itself. It doesn't need a bank, doesn't need a regulator, doesn't need any framework whatsoever. So there's no point even talking to these people. So I like to get that point across by exhibiting a level of distaste for this entire establishment. I'd like to express that in a way that is not in any way confusing for anybody. In case anyone is confused by what I feel about these people, I try to make it as clear as possible
Right.
by being extremely vocal, and as I have been at times. And the other thing about giving people in the space attention or whatever. So we were the only media in Bitcoin for 5 years, from 2011 for 5 years. We're really the only Bitcoin media in the world was the Keiser Report that had any traction.
Right.
So starting in 2016, 2017 with SegWit and a lot of this other stuff. So we saw a lot of extra media come around. And so I know it doing media is tough. I know how difficult it is. So, Stacy and I made a point of, let's throw as much light on these new media folks as much as possible, because it's already tough enough. Let's get as much as possible, because we need to get the narrative straight against the mainstream media, which is always going to side with the regulators,
Right.
because they're in bed with each other, and that's always going to be the case. So it helps everybody.
And I appreciate the way you said that too. And you mentioned regulation. There's a lot of talk about defense and regulation and all this stuff the United States is trying to impose. There's a lot of talk about the stablecoin stuff, non-custodial or unhosted wallets. What are your thoughts on U.S. regulation and legislation that's trying to affect and hamper and control and centralize, in a way, a lot of Bitcoin's properties?
Ignore it.
Great
Just
answer.
ignore it. There is, the IRS is certainly a regulator that you should not ignore. You stay current with your taxes. I always recommend. I am current. I recommend everyone stay current with your taxes. But as far as anybody else, just completely ignore them, because they live on fiat money. They're all paid on fiat money, and fiat money is going to zero, and they're all going to be unemployed within 2 or 3 years anyway. They're not going to have any jobs left, because the value of the dollar is going to zero. Some of them will save themselves and become Bitcoiners.
Right.
And then we don't have to worry about them, because they're Bitcoiners.
Right.
So the ones that want to survive will become Bitcoiners. The ones who masochistically want to die on a cross of fiat money are welcome to do so. Nice knowing you. Adios. Have a nice life. Goodbye.
Makes sense. I love it, dude. I love it. Such great answers. And one thing too, since the last time that I had you on the show back in late April of last year, I've been branching out and kind of restructuring my channel. And since doing that, I've gotten more out of the crypto echo chamber per se. And I'm actually reaching new people who are just hearing about Bitcoin, or just wanting to learn about, just finally deciding to make the decision to actually get involved with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So what I'd like to ask you is, for people who are thinking about getting involved in Bitcoin, that are been just researching, just not sure, in your words, why Bitcoin?
Well, it separates the state from money. So that's not an easy concept to lead a conversation with, but I think it is a very important concept, and one that if you can get across to somebody, they will be on their path toward Bitcoiner status. So it's really the first time ever that we've had the ability to own ourselves an unconfiscatable hard money like Bitcoin, that I can transact with anybody anywhere without any third party at all. No bank, no government, no verification required. And this is why um, you see such incredible attention right now in the Black community for Bitcoin, as Bitcoin and Black America, the book written by Isaiah Jackson, quotes me in the book, because I said on my show that if the Black community were to start buying Bitcoin today, I think it was like $20 at the time, they would eventually own the white community. So I was trying to make a point that the Black community in America has been persecuted for more than even the history of America, right? It goes back to pre history of America. And you have the ability for the first time to have unconfiscatable wealth that is a store of value. That's hard money. And so this is this is the ultimate emancipation. It's emancipation uh, from fiat money slavery. And we all suffer from fiat money slavery. We're all slaves to fiat money.
Slaves of
And,
debt, for sure.
so this is the emancipation from that. So, you're going to get two responses. Either the one response will be like, well, I don't really care. I'm happy being a fiat money slave. And okay, so the conversation's over. Have a nice, have fun being poor. Then the second response is, wow, that sounds good to me because I really don't want to be a fiat money slave. Tell me more. So all around the world, people in countries that are having their fiat money collapse, whether it's Iran, Venezuela, or, dozens of countries, this message resonates and Bitcoin's getting huge. Nigeria is a huge Bitcoin hotspot because they just bypassed the entire banking infrastructure that they've been deprived of for years and went right into the Bitcoin standard. And like up to 30% of the country is now hyper Bitcoinization.
It's
right?
crazy.
So, totally changed. The last people in the world who will be ultimately orange pilled will probably be middle class white Americans they're the ones who are the number one beneficiary of the US dollar world reserve status. They are the ones who are the beneficiary of the world's biggest military force of the US. And they have the most to lose. So they're not exactly excited about opting out of the fiat money system, when they are living in the lap of luxury. Even the poorer people in America, when you compare them to the poor people of, let's say, India, they're living
They're
like
not poor.
kings.
Yeah, they're not poor.
They're not poor, are they? No.
When you look around the world, no. But is there going to be a middle class? That's the other thing. It seems like everything that's going on is trying to even just get rid of the middle class and just have it just be the has and the has-nots.
There'll be no middle class. So it's going to be Bitcoiners, and then there's going to be fiat money slaves. That's
right.
it. There's no middle class. Middle class is dead.
I agree. And that's why I mentioned it. So I want to encourage people to check out the interview that you did with Daniela Cambone from Stansberry Research. And I also want to let Paulie P know that I'm not going to ask Max to give him Daniela's number because he keeps harassing me to get you to give Daniela's number out. He wants to talk to her, but he's a good friend of mine. I just wanted to say that I'm not doing that, but I want people to check out that interview. It's a really good interview. Also a great channel. She's a great interviewer. So check out Stansberry Research. You had made some predictions, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, in 2019, predicting 2020 price to end Bitcoin at a $29,000 price or $28,000 price, and we ended at 29. So you've been almost spot on compared to a lot of other crypto experts. And I know a lot of people want to hear your price prediction if they haven't watched the episode that you did with Stansberry Research. But before we get into Bitcoin, and I know that you still own a lot of gold and silver and you're still a proponent of, even though you are pushing more in the Bitcoin element, do you have any price predictions for silver and gold for 2021 before we get into Bitcoin?
Well, it's kind of all connected. So my Bitcoin prediction, it's tied to not only this wave of adoption and institutional money, but also with a dollar collapse. So the dollar collapse, the DXY, I see that dropping precipitously. So that's how I come up with Bitcoin at 220,000 a coin. Gold, I mentioned on her show at 3,000, right? So that's a 50% move. That's a pretty huge move.
Mm-hmm.
And silver above $100, right? So that's another big move, but not as big as Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the fastest horse in the race. But so it's predicated on, in the case of Bitcoin, there's a huge adoption plus dollar collapse. So that's why it's such an explosive move. With gold, it's already an $11 trillion asset or something like that. So it's not going to, it doesn't have a lot of room on the upside for more adoption. It's already it's the second most traded commodity in the world right now, right behind oil, right?
Okay.
So it's not a newcomer, yes, for sure.
No.
Silver, as always, has a move that's multiples of gold. It's gold's crazy cousin, right? Silver is always much more volatile than gold. And interestingly, I just saw something that when Bitcoin gets to 80,000 a coin, it'll have a market cap bigger than silver. So I think that was going to make pretty big news because it will firmly establish Bitcoin as right in, right there with gold and silver, because it'll be bigger than silver. And then it'll have that target right on gold. Okay, we took out silver, let's go after gold. So to the answer to the question is, those are my targets, but it's based on, I need to see the dollar really crash. And I think what I'm hearing out of DC right now from Janet Yellen and others is making me feel like this is gonna be the case in 2021, because they're simply going to quadruple down on the exact same policies that got them to where they are today. And that's going to really crush the dollar. And everyone else in the world is already positioned for this. So many countries have been buying gold for the last few years to get ready for the day they pull the plug on the dollar. And so they're positioning already for this. And now that they've got Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is like in Iran, for example, they've got like 3 or 4% of the hash rate already. And they're the victim of sanctions from the US. And the story this past week was that they had a huge blackout in Iran from all the Bitcoin mining they're doing. Anecdotally, that's
Is that what it was? Is that what the cause was from that you're hearing?
I've heard this. I haven't heard. It's tough to get verifiable facts out, but nevertheless, it's a cool story. And why not? Once you get orange pilled, you can't come back. They're like, if the senior leadership in Iran suddenly figured out that this is their ultimate pathway out of this U.S. dollar hegemony, that's going to be a big develop as a big story. And of course, they have huge influence all over the world. And if you see countries starting to get into a hash race or a hash war, where there's a sovereign struggle in a battle to acquire Bitcoin and mine Bitcoin, everything, the number go up, technology kicks in, hash rate goes up, security goes up, price goes up. That's how we get to the $220,000 level. It's a seismic event. If we don't have a huge event like that, I'm going to miss my target. But I think 2021 is the year we see major global financial dislocation happening.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And when you mentioned de-dollarization earlier, it seemed like around the 2017 time period, when it was early in Trump's administration, there was all this talk about de-dollarization. You've seen the BRICS nation banks working together. You've seen Chinese doing the petro yuan, selling petro for the first time, competing against the U.S. petro market. And then that kind of almost diminished, and kind of like that rhetoric was kind of going away, and more so in the past few months, it's kind of come back. Do you see the potential possibility of the dollar itself, the US dollar, losing its world reserve status, and if so, how do you think that would affect the everyday person?
Well, Christine Lagarde said it best just a couple of days ago, talking about Bitcoin. She said it's an escape valve. And in the context of what she was saying, well, we need to do something about this. We need to bring in global regulation, which of course is impossible. But her comment is telling, in that it's true that any country that wants to get out from underneath US dollar hegemony can go, the escape valve is Bitcoin. And so I think that we're going to see that idea embraced by countries and people and institutions and bankers and corporations all over the world who want to get away from, as Michael Saylor calls it, the melting ice cube of US dollar. And the ability to defend the US dollar, I think, is going to get very tough, because as Paul Krugman over there at the New York Times has said, the US dollar is backed by men with guns.
Right.
So in other words, he's saying the U.S. Pentagon, which is we fund it to the tune of $1.5 trillion a year, roughly half the taxes collected goes to the Pentagon. They are what back.
It sounds like military script versus fiat per se, but
the military backs the fiat money, and the military.
It seems like a military script.
The amount of the gas bill for the Pentagon every day, I read this a few years ago. I don't know what the current number is, but they spend $250 billion a day just to fill up the planes and tanks and stuff.
That is insane.
Right? Just their daily gas bill is. So, it's a very expensive apparatus, and empires always have this problem. They expand, and then but they have to defend that expansion militarily, and it's quite expensive. You got supply lines, you've got soldiers, you got to pay the soldiers, and empires typically they overextend, and they can't pay for it to keep the empire, and it starts to crumble. And the people, like in the US, like in the Roman Empire, people have this assumption that, well, one day the barbarians showed up and they took over the empire. But leading up to that, for years and years, the people living in the Roman Empire were more or less inviting the barbarians to come in to save them from this crumbling empire. So I think you're going to see a lot of people in the US who are like, I got it. This situation is so bad. I'm not the idea of having situation change dramatically might be better than what it is now, right? So, America as the brand, America is a brand. It's an idea, but it's also a brand, right? Yeah. America is not a country that you associate necessarily like with France. You associate it with fine wine and cheese, and America is freedom, right? And that's, what is it? It's 10 different people will tell you 10 different definitions of that word. And it's a brilliant brand because it appeals to people in different ways. But if the confidence in that brand drops, it becomes like New Coke, or the Edsel, or, it's just like, it loses that brand appeal. And suddenly everyone wants to doesn't want to, America becomes the Edsel of countries. Suddenly it can happen quickly. And, the whole culture shifts, the zeitgeist shifts, the cultural epicenter moves, could go to Asia, could go somewhere else. People are like, this isn't very fun anymore. I'm getting out. People with Bitcoin are portable. They can go anywhere they want pretty much. And other countries are welcoming them. And so all these things are coming to the fore here in 2021, it looks like.
Definitely 100%. And I know we're kind of slightly limited on time. So before I get into the last few questions, I wanted to ask, and no pun intended, as far as your name being Max, it seems as if you're kind of still a Bitcoin maximalist. Is there any other cryptocurrencies or blockchain projects at all that you're watching, that you endorse, that you have any sort of faith in, or is it just Bitcoin and the orange pill is all you need?
Yeah, pretty much. Once you step away from Bitcoin, the risk goes up dramatically. So obviously, you've got like 5,000 or 6,000 of these other things going on. 98% of them are clearly to be avoided. They're just junk. Of the remaining couple of dozen, they're centralized. They have attacked. They can be attacked. They've got open attack vectors. There's just the risk profile is dramatically worse than it is with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, you've got the best risk adjusted rate of return. So the thing is about when people say, oh, I'm into this other coin, I made X number of percentage points in a week. But on a risk adjusted basis, you're actually losing money. I mean, you got to look at it like a financier, like a Wall Streeter. The risk is part of the reward. And, that's how rich people get rich, is not by making money so much as reducing risk. Reducing risk is how you make money, not just make money to make money. You need to reduce risk. That's how the mega rich get rich. And so once you step away from Bitcoin, you're inviting risk into your portfolio that is not rewarded. You don't get enough reward for the amount of risk you're taking. Like I read that these Robinhood traders are getting into options, right? So the options market has exploded because an option on Tesla stock is only $3. Why would I want to buy, $800 for the Tesla stock when I can buy an option for $3? Because the reason is that once you buy that option, the risk reward ratio, it goes up by an enormous factor, almost incalculably higher risk than just buying the stock outright.
Something weird just happened to my computer as I was trying to do a screen share, so I'm not sure how everything looks on everybody else's end. I'm waiting for my Google Chrome to respond. It's currently locked up. I've never had this happen before. I was going to try to share screen on and show a little bit about Swan Bitcoin. I wanted to ask you exactly what Swan is. Is it something that you started?
No, yeah, sure.
Just,
Swan?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just curious about Swan
Oh,
because
well,
I know
Swan
several
Bitcoin,
students at UC are promoting it.
it started up I guess it's a couple of years ago now. So it was designed to be the easiest on-ramp 1 year ago. So it's the easiest on-ramp to Bitcoin of anywhere you go, and it's the cheapest to get onto Bitcoin. So it's a Bitcoin maximalist play, unlike other, let's say, on ramps. So the most popular one is Coinbase, but Coinbase has a lot of other funny business going on there, and their relationship with the U.S. government is not really something you want to be supporting, and the fees are higher, a lot higher, and so with Swan, it's easy, it's cheap. You can get your Bitcoin quickly. It's They have smash buys, so you can just buy it quickly. You can have automatically pulled off the Swan right into your, let's say, Casa wallet. So it's got multi-sig protection,
Okay.
right? So it's not held by Swan. It's all maximalist. It's a great group of folks. They put a lot of like great content. And I've known Corey for a number of years, and we invested in the company a little bit because we just think it's a great team. And so we support Swan, we support Casa in a big way. These companies that since we've been around for a while, I think we've been able to find ones that I think are really supportive to the ecosystem, good companies. And I think altcoins, going back to the history of altcoins, in 2011, it was Bitcoin really. From 2011 up until, Mount Gox, maybe a year after Mount Gox, right? They had that kind of experimentation. You had altcoins, things were, and the story at that time was that the core developers of Bitcoin were just too slow. They weren't getting stuff out. Mike Hearn, remember him?
Yeah.
He rage quit at like $400 or $600. So there's a lot of the core developers, a lot of contentiousness going on in the developers, and people like Vitalik, who was a core developer. He's like, I'm going to go start my own coin, Ethereum, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then you had all these Ethereum people did all those platform coins and smart contract coins. We know who those are. And then you had the privacy coins. And
didn't somebody create a Max Keiser coin though too?
Yeah.
Was that you?
No, these two students in Bristol University.
Okay.
They were fans of the show. They created a coin. One of them, it became famous, was as Crypto Cobain.
Okay.
Was one of the two guys that was living in the UK. So at that time there was Bill Murray coin, Kanye West coin. So this is back in 2014.
Right.
So they're like, oh, let's do this. It's fun. But starting in around 2016, now 2017, it became clear that period was dying. It was finished because everything that anything else was trying to do, Bitcoin does or was about to do or can do. SegWit was a huge, in 2017 with SegWit, that was an enormous leap forward. This is what attracted Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor came into Bitcoin in 2013 and then walked away from it. They thought it was too funky. Then after he saw what happened with SegWit and the cyber hornets, repelled this attack, he started to get into it again. So that was an important piece of history. And so then starting at that period, it became like maximalism became, I think, for me, the only way to go really, because there's nothing anything else can do that Bitcoin can't do or is in the process of doing. And if it is something completely different, then that I wouldn't. They don't compete with Bitcoin. Even Ethereum. I don't consider that a competitor to Bitcoin. It's a software platform, and they do stuff on it, but it's not. It doesn't compete with Bitcoin. It's not a store of value. They have no idea how many coins exist. They've never had an audit. But it's a fun project for some people. Doesn't compete with Bitcoin, but people can trade stuff if they want. But it does don't put the two in the same category. They're not.
Okay, cool. And I appreciate that. And again, for some reason, like none of this on my end has cleared up. So I'm not even exactly sure how I'm going to end the stream other than or shutting my computer down. So I know that we were getting ready to wrap things up. Do you have any final thoughts on your end that you want to leave people with, Max?
Well, this week we've got a reemergence of the Tether FUD from 2017. I think Nouriel Roubini stirred up the Tether FUD pot. And so all these idiots are repeating the 2017 Tether FUD. It's nonsense. And within a few weeks, I'm sure it'll go back into the dark recesses of everyone's collective, forgetting about it once again. So, these things come back every once in a while, but they're like bad TV shows. They appear on reruns every once in a while. They don't get any better. They're just as bad. The Tether rerun is just as bad in 2021 as it was in 2017. It's a silly, nonsensical thing. But nevertheless, the mainstream media, it gets fooled all the time because I've never actually done any research into this kind of stuff. So that's my final word, Rice. This has been awesome to have me back on. The production values here, I'm envious of all these screen fireworks you have going on here. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, everything just got screwed up on my computer, and thankfully, I could just log on to my phone and be able to connect. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is just the most bizarre thing because I have never had my computer lock up like this. I mean, my computer is it's completely frozen. It's for a minute it was just you, and I thought, oh my God, like I left Max alone on my channel, which would have been a blessing, but I would have felt so freaking bad. So I'm glad I was able to be here right now.
Super.
Well, dude, thank you again for your time, man. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I would definitely encourage people to check out my Patreon channel. Be sure you're following me on not only Library, but also Odyssey, where I have backups of all my videos and I post up extra content. You can contribute to the channel via PayPal, Cash App, and my crypto address is down below in the video description. Make sure you're checking out both Max's shows, the Keiser Report. You should already be familiar with that. But also make sure you subscribe to the Orange Pill podcast. I have links down below. We shared it in the video. Max, again, I really appreciate your time. I want to go ahead and end things on the video live stream, and I'll be bearing with you in just 1 second. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and smash that like button. Much love.
Bye.